Okay, so want to know what I want to talk about today?
Let's do it. What do you want to talk about?
Kind of want to talk about how family, first of all, like identifying family familiar dynamic, and then how that shows up in leadership
Hmm.
and how that could hold the leadership and company or organization back from their actual true potential growth. What do you think? What do you want to talk about today?
I'm with it. I'm the counterpuncher. So if you got something in your head you want to talk about, I can bullshit with the best of them. I um
Tell me you're a good salesperson without telling me you're a good salesperson.
no, that's good. Like leadership's my jam. I think, man, there's so much to it, right? Like people talk about leadership all the time in terms of communication styles and how to have like an effective coaching conversation. That's almost like two or three steps down the road, right? Like there's so much pre-work that needs to be done to understand yourself before you can lead other people. And that's why I've long said leadership isn't just like unilateral, like me to you. It's so much me to me, you to you, us to us. It's a lot of parallel leadership as well. So I think before you can try and lead anyone as a leader, you have to be confident that you've done the work um, for yourself. And I think that's where a lot of this comes in is what's the work before the work. And I think that's where the family familiar dynamics comes in, understanding, where your gaps as a person are, what are your patterns, having an awareness of it. Because often, as you know, like we tend to project that onto other people quite often, end up retracting it back to ourselves. So I think that's sort of where it all starts.
Yeah, so the energy, you said you attract essentially what you're giving out. So it's all energy, right? So family familiar dynamic obviously is not the most common term to reference. So let's talk about that. We've talked about that a bunch and very
Mhm.
often. What's your interpretation of that?
Yeah. So, based on our conversations, and I'm not the world's foremost, expert in any of this, but the way that I interpret it is patterns and scenarios from your childhood tend to play themselves out based on trauma or experiences you had in your childhood in your adult life. They tend to play themselves out and almost mirror things that you went through. A lot of times, at least in my life, based on relationships I had with family members, I tend to find myself gravitating back towards those familiar situations. Whether it's bosses I've had in the past, partners I've had in the past. You and I did this exercise when we first started our coaching where, I did my timeline from when I was a kid the whole way up into now. And it was funny, you could almost like fold it over and like match it up, sort of the scenarios that I went through as a child and the scenarios that I was experiencing as an adult. Very similar, a lot of parallels in terms of the types of individuals that I was around or seeking out, the types of situations that I was around or seeking out. And at least for me, that's where I found it show up in my life is it's almost like a cycle repeating itself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So family familiar dynamic stems from obviously you constantly trying to recreate what was familiar to you as a child because that's how the human brain works, right? We
Right.
want anything that's comfortable and familiar. So we're constantly recreating really the relationship that we had with our biological mom and our biological dad. And if we didn't have a biological mom and dad in sight, then whoever filled that role for us.
Okay. Yep.
So you're right. And the people that we hire, the people on our leadership team tend to somewhat fill the gap of those relationships as well. So it doesn't always have to relate to trauma, although in entrepreneurial world, I think there's a lot of that unspoken anyway. Um so it doesn't always have to be like bad, negative, trauma related. It could just simply be that you had a really good relationship with your mom and dad and you're constantly recreating that and that's amazing. And either way, you want to be aware of it and improve those relationships over and over again. So let's say that you did have a bad relationship with your biological dad and now you're an owner of a company. Who are you likely to attract when you hire your employees?
That relationship.
Not even employees, right? Even the clients that you attract, it will constantly be those similar relationships where they're hard, strained, however you would define your relationship with your father in in this instance.
I think what we find too, Kate, is the reason it's so prevalent in entrepreneurs is typically, in times of high stress, we default back to those types of behaviors. And as entrepreneurs, what do we have a lot of? New scenarios, high stress scenarios. I think that's why it's so common for us to go back to like lizard brain and a lot of those family familiar dynamics come out. That's why the internal work is so important because you can never get away from that. If you're going to try to achieve anything great in life, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard as shit. And you're going to be in these situations potentially all the time. And I think that's where you almost need to counteract it proactively. Don't wait for the stuff to happen and be like, oh man, what are the techniques and the tools? You need to proactively seek out this training because as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as consultants, coaches, you're going to be in these scenarios often. And I think that's why this awareness that we're trying to bring to folks about how important this work is, it creates a really, really good foundation from which to build leadership skills and communication skills and coaching ability, because that will always be the backbone of your training and your skill set, regardless of what type of situation you find yourself in.
Ooh, I like that you suggest being proactive about it because I was actually reactive in my specific experience. So I had like traumatic things in the workplace happen that just replicated my childhood. And then I learned all about this from like crisis mode. But I actually like the proactiveness.
I think that's the value that we can bring, really, right? So you and I both come from a place of being reactive. I mean, hell, I was forced to get a coach at my last job because I was acting out because of these trauma patterns. And through that, I realized how impactful it is. And that's how you and I came to work together, because I became somewhat obsessed with it and really started buying in. And my life has changed 180 degrees in the past 6 months. Uh, I had a lot of skill previously. I was pretty objectively good at my job, but I kept hitting this ceiling, right? Of like potential and output. I would get burned out. It was like this cycle, this tug and push and pull until I realized, like, shit, this is because I haven't gone back and addressed the root issue here. And it's because there's so much unresolved stuff from my childhood that's playing itself out in my adult life. The relationships that I end up seeking out through the energy that I'm putting out into the world, the way that I react to certain situations, the way I think and interpret certain situations is almost like I was laying little traps subconsciously for myself until I figured it out. And it starts with like an awareness. It's almost like in the military, they have that guy that goes ahead of the troops and he finds like the bombs and the mines. That's what this work ends up being. You get to seek out and understand the patterns before they ever pop up. And I think for me, it's just that's the beauty is now I see what's happening. I understand it. And instead of trying to like flail around and search out and seek out advice and guidance, I now have a lens through which I can understand what's happening, select the right tool from the toolbox, and pivot in real time instead of sort of having this major fallout, which has costed me opportunities in the past.
Over and over and over again, which is
Over and over.
actually
Yeah.
your ceiling that you've already capped yourself at.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned subconscious. So subconscious is basically a program and it's built and created in your mind from the ages of 0 to 19. So in utero to 19 years old. But it's really created like the foundation and the core of it's from 0 to 7 years old. So
Mm.
anything that was happening to you, good, bad, or indifferent between the ages of 0 and 7 is what you are living off of. 95% of your day is subconsciously programmed. It's your automatic thoughts happening over and over and over again. And then that's where your family familiar dynamic comes in. It's actually your subconscious constantly trying to find what it was already programmed with from 0 to 7. So, without obviously naming names, what example could you give us where you attracted a mother or father figure in your work environment in previous life?
Sure. And just to put a bow on the subconscious thing, I think that's why it's so hard to identify as well, because it's not something that we're
Mm.
consciously doing. Right. And that's where when you start going down this path of trying to figure it out, having a guide that can help give us that perspective and offer a viewpoint that maybe we hadn't considered before. We talked about it on one of the previous podcasts we did. It allows you to switch from being this passenger in your life, sort of going wherever the road takes you, to being the driver of the vehicle and having agency over what happens. It's really this counterintuitive thing where it's like sort of negative because you're admitting that, like, hey, I'm causing a lot of this shit, but it's empowering because instead of thinking like, man, why does all this keep happening? Why can't I achieve the results that I want? You realize, oh, I can if I stop acting like an idiot and I make these changes and do the things that I need to do to attract the results that I want. So 100%, like, the reason that it's so difficult is because it's happening in the ancient lizard brain. Like, we don't understand what's going on, and our brain needs to find something that's familiar, right? Like, we need to understand and put things into these pretty little boxes, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. For me, the way I started seeing it show up, as a child, I had some negligence, was neglected, wasn't very close with either one of my parents, and I started seeking out projects and situations and really challenging scenarios to show people how talented I was or how impressive my skill set could be. Sometimes even just taking on projects that I know aren't a good fit, to get that external validation. What it turned into over time was this cascading timeline of crap that I ended up seeking out just to show people how good I was at my job. In reality, what it led to was a burnt out human being who showed up worse at home, showed up worse at work. I was an ineffective leader. Comes back to that metaphor of the cup, right? Like, I was not putting any energy into filling my cup. So eventually I got to the end of the road where I had nothing left to pour into other people anymore. That's when I started bashing my head against the wall and hitting this ceiling of potential, as I describe it. I'd escalate up the ladder somewhere, have this string of impressive accomplishments, and it would fizzle out, whether by my doing or someone else's doing. And it was like uncanny. I'm like, how can I be 30 years old, have all these opportunities to smash it and be in these elevated leadership positions, and I can't get across the goal line? And it was me. Over time, I realized through this coaching, it was me. The energy that I was putting out there and the family familiar dynamics that I was seeking or attracting because I didn't understand it was not allowing me to get past the finish line in the way that I wanted to, right? So as soon as I started understanding what was going on, having an awareness of it, understanding my trauma patterns, where it came from, why it's happening, what it looks like in present day, I was able to avoid it, cease that energy, and really try and put out a different energy. I think it's two parts. We talk a lot about not doing so much, so not doing as much of that seeking of external validation and doing more of the self validation. It's like two parts, part 1A, part 1B. And I think for me now, we talked about it previously, but everything I do is radically uncompromising. I only want to bring an energy into my life that gives me joy, gives me energy, allows me to contribute more to my family, to my interests, my hobbies. And from that, counterintuitively, I have much more to give to people. I'm able to put the right energy out there and, quite honestly, inspire other people to do the same as well, which is something we talked about recently.
Yes. Yeah, you covered a lot there. Thank you. Energy is like a whole conversation I could talk about literally all day. Before that, though, you mentioned you were able through this work to identify what was blocking you and what how you kept getting to the same stopgap in the road every single time.
Yeah.
What, like, keeping the family familiar in mind and recreating those relationships, talk to me about the actual recreation of the relationships, whether it was with your previous job or the last 4 jobs. Like, where in your leadership roles or or bosses have you recreated either a mother or father figure to you that actually ended up suppressing your potential?
It's wild. Like, when we started doing the exercises and I started thinking through it, I was trying to recreate, subconsciously, a relationship that I had with my dad when I was younger. And I felt that I always wanted to get dad's approval
Mhm.
and I just wanted him to be proud of me, right? So in my adult life, I would do whatever it took at each one of these positions to seek out, okay, who's the leader, right? Who is the father figure of the staff? I would sort of attach myself to their hip, climb up the ranks slowly, take on a lot of work that necessarily wasn't like a good fit for me, but I was able to do it through, grit and a lot of effort. Um, I would attain some level of recognition. I'd feel really good about it. That'd be like the climax, the peak. It's like, oh, awesome. I got his attention. And then the fallout was, but at what cost? Now I have no energy. Like
Mm.
I've abandoned relationships. I've taken on all this work that I don't want. And that's where the fallout happens because I can't show up the same way that I did the past 6 months climbing the mountain. And then I ultimately end up falling down because I'm not able to be that person because it requires so much of me that you're not able to give forever. And then for me, that's the cycle, right? And then I come crashing down. I lose the opportunity because I'm not able to show up the same way anymore. Move on to the next job, find the leader, wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah. So at what cost, you said? Like literally at what cost? Like your life, right? Your
For me,
potential, your
yeah,
relationships, your family. It's for everybody.
yep,
So, and when you say subconsciously you're recreating this over and over, that literally just means you're unaware of what you're doing
yes,
accidentally, right? I mean, no one's
100%.
aware until you're aware.
No, I mean, outside of like just wanting to be successful or like do well, I always justified it as like being naturally talented or well, whatever weird justification.
Hmm.
People would like describe me as a know-it-all or a try-hard, and that used to bug the crap out of me. But it was because of this, like it was this behavior, it was this seeking of external validation that probably did make me come across as a try-hard or be like that guy. You know what I mean? And it was totally by accident. 100% did not have an awareness of it. Um, I'll give a mutual acquaintance of ours, Benmont, a big shout out. Just to quickly name drop him, we had a really good conversation probably 6 months ago at the airport. Actually, he and I were both flying out, catching a burger, waiting for the flight, and he sort of pointed it out to me that I was a fixer, and I'm like, well, what exactly does that mean? And we started working through it. And it had shown up so many times where I would be gravitating towards these situations that were chaotic and broken because
Mm.
I felt compelled to fix it, ultimately to get that pat on the back and the attaboy that we always talk about. And that was like the beginning of this journey for me. And I thought about it the whole freaking flight home. I'm like, what does that mean? And it just planted this little seed that was annoying for weeks. And through the exercises that you and I did and this awesome coaching now over the past few months, I was able to identify and figure out why it happens, what it looks like when it's starting to happen. And the cure really is to replace that external validation with self validation, with self
Hmm.
worth and valuing my skills and what I do and being able to look myself in the mirror and be like, dude, you're sick. You don't need anybody else to tell you that you're sick. You're sick. You're awesome at what you do. And you make big impact. You have great influence on people's lives. And really look around and like a lot of these scenarios in which I would maybe give other people credit, like, oh, they gave me this opportunity. I owe them so much. Or, man, thank God for this mentor that I had because I wouldn't be here without him. While probably some element of truth there, at the end of the day, I sought out the mentor. I scheduled the meeting with the person that gave me the opportunity. I crushed it once I got the opportunity. I promoted the people and trained the people and developed the playbooks and the SOPs. I just started giving myself credit for the things that I was able to do, not in an egotistical or narcissistic way, just in an objective, like, hey, man, you did something good here as well.
You acknowledging yourself.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and you creating all of those, you said you would seek out almost chaotic environments. So not everybody needs to know or does know, but that you were just recreating your childhood, right? Like that was how you would describe your childhood in
Yep.
3 words or less.
Hmm.
And you were just recreating that over and over. And when we started talking, it's like, well, wait a minute. Not everything needs to be hard. Not everything is supposed to be hard or chaotic. Like, not everything is chaotic or hard for everybody else. Why is that?
That was so hard for me to like understand at first because I got so used to that feeling of like, man, this
Hmm.
is what success feels like to me. That's how I would define it. Until now I know, right? Like now I know that it's not. And until you get to this side and you understand, like, holy crap, you can have success in a way that feels effortless
Yeah.
and you can be in flow state and you can only do things that you enjoy. Like that thought in itself would have seemed crazy to me a year ago. You mean I can have success and accolade and high level of income and impact and I can enjoy what I do, you're full of shit. That's what I was
Yeah.
said. Now it's like,
It's me too,
man,
by the
why
way.
doesn't why doesn't everyone do this? And I think because of this lack of awareness, right? There's just not enough good people out there trying to spread the word of like, hey, dude, before you read the 1,000 books that I have sitting around me back here on my bookshelf, like, why don't we start with figuring out ourselves, right? Like, what about our past and our history? And what baggage are we bringing to that leadership conversation, to that coaching session, to that consultation call? What baggage are we bringing? How are we showing up? That has to happen first.
Yeah. And you mentioned something else during your previous example. One second, let me think. I didn't want to skip over it. Maybe I should start writing things down.
Damn, this blabbing that I do.
Yeah, I should start writing it down. Well, I'm sure I'll think of it again. But the recreation of, we'll talk about external validation. So everything that you were doing, you were purposely seeking those chaotic environments and the hard problems to solve. So you were defined as a fixer by someone you mentioned. You were doing all of that in a previous life to be recognized, to
Yes.
get that external validation. You had no idea that's why you were doing it. You thought it was normal, but that's how you used to get acknowledgement from your dad as a child.
Yes.
So
Yep.
that's all you knew, right? And then once we started to identify that's what was happening, because everybody's scenario is different, obviously. So you have to like listen to your timeline exercise and see what's actually being repeated. But for you, that's what it was. And once we identified that you were doing everything for external validation, you were able to, like, what's the counterpart of that? How do we give
Mhm.
yourself validation? How do we
Mhm.
give yourself appreciation and stop seeking external acceptance and external, you just wanted to be seen. So like what happened in your mind after you made that switch? Like, oh my God, what if I don't need or do to get that external, like, good pat on the back, good job, Kyle?
Yeah, so it's like in psychology, they would talk about feedback loop, right? And that's
Mhm.
just sort of what I had to create. Like I had to create a new, like literally a new pathway in my brain of like feedback instead of only feeling validated if someone else told me I was doing a good job. I had to train myself to be like genuinely proud. And I think that's what I struggled with for a long time. Took a lot of journaling, a lot of like mental exercise, a lot of late nights, honestly, after conversations with you and others around like, why don't I? It was weird. It like occurred to me that, man, I'm never proud of myself. I was only able to like see that I had done something good through someone else letting me know, making me aware of it. And that was like so messed up to me. And I remember just thinking through it, like, why? And then that's when I went on this mission to go backwards. You know, instead of trying to fix it forwards, it's like, what am I missing previously? And I started going back to all these great things that I've done, um, you know, like accolades and promotions and so on and so forth, really cool things that have happened. And I started realizing, like, man, I'm the common denominator, like in all these things over and over and over again. Although I didn't get to the level that I probably could have, I had success over and over and over again. That wasn't because of the environment or the mentors or the books that I read or the videos that I watched. It was me. And then that's when I just like an epiphany. One day I was like, holy shit, like I'm cool. I'm like good at what I do. And then I started realizing going forward, then now that we caught back up, we went backwards to understand it. Going forward, the awareness was now there. I had the lens and the new feedback loop. When I did something, I was able to realize, oh, that was me. I'm like, that's awesome. And I was able to have like genuine pride. And we can talk through it. Like there was a specific scenario that you and I have spoke about where I got on stage and did some like scary ass stuff for me. And that's like, that was the first time I've ever felt proud, like in present day. And it was awesome.
Yeah, so we can talk about that. Once you identified that you were doing everything for external validation, and then you were able to slow down and just do it for yourself and appreciate yourself, you're almost able to let go of all of that doing, right? Like you don't
Mhm.
need to take on the extra 4 jobs or 4 projects to get the pat on the back because you're doing it yourself the whole time. You're
Yeah.
now able to pat yourself on the back every day moving forward, and you don't need to take on all of this extra stuff,
Hmm.
the doing,
Yeah.
ew, to get the pat on the back because you're not looking for it from anyone else anymore. You've learned since then, you've learned to just do it for yourself, appreciate yourself, and your energy has changed so dramatically. I'd like to ask, before this work, we'll say, how would you describe your energy before and then after?
I was stretched like really thin. I think the metaphor we used last time, I felt like I was spinning 100 plates. And if you just like take a second to visualize like what somebody like that looks like, it is chaotic. It is maybe impressive from an outsider looking in, but it's like, how long can they do that for? Like, this has gone on for a long time. And the answer is not very long. You end up dropping the plates eventually. Spoiler alert. And that's what happened in my life. I started dropping the plates one by one. It was a relationship with my wife, relationship with my kids, relationship with myself, my coworkers, people on the leadership team, the folks that I led. It was a trickle down effect. And I think now, in comparison to that, the high effort, the strain, the feeling stretched really thin, now I just show up as me. It was like I took 3 sides of my personality and just brought them back together. I just slowed down. It was actually really what it is we'll probably get to at some point. It's a lack of doing, which was so weird for me because I'm such a hustler and a grinder. Like, I want to be doing. It was just a lack of doing and just putting out the energy, being very clear on what I want, who I want to be, the type of life I want to live, what I'm interested in, what brings me joy, what I don't enjoy, and specifically only allowing those things in to pass through the filter, right? And through that, I ended up getting more opportunity and had more success and had more confidence. So much confidence that I went on and started my own consulting and coaching companies, Statera Success Systems, right? We talked about in the last call. I never would have done that. Never ever would have done that prior to this type of work. So to answer your question is I'm able to show up as me instead of the guy spinning 100,000 plates. And it's an effortless, a much
With the
more
mask.
exactly.
Yeah. I would describe your energy as, I mean, chaotic is like one word, right? Like anxious, very like high strung.
Yeah, high strung. Yeah.
Um,
Back then.
yeah.
Yeah.
Back then, yeah. And now, like once you made the switch, it was like you literally made a switch. And I don't think there's ever going back for you, which is amazing. But
Yeah,
your
it is. It's
energy,
like it's
like,
calm, right? It's just
yeah,
like a calm energy. Yeah.
it's calm. Yeah. Like if we record all of our coaching calls, and if
Mhm.
you go back, you could hear the first half of them with your hyper high strung personality showing up, energy showing up,
Such a
which is
nice way to
fine.
put it.
Yeah. Thank you. And then now it's like, oh my God, you're so calm. Like you're so calm. And you're still, it's like in the best way possible. Like you're showing up more than you ever have in all ways.
Yeah, in all phases of life, 100%. I mean, we talked yesterday about my wife and I's relationship and how that's improved, and how much more time I'm spending with my kids now, and how much more time I'm spending at the gym or reading the book. It's like self love, family love, work love. I'm just able to give more because I'm not spending all of that precious like energy capital that we build up, right? On stuff that I shouldn't be working on. It's
Shouldn't be. Yeah.
exclusively being spent on things now that I want to be involved with, that bring me joy, where I have maximum impact. So it's exponential. Like once you get the snowball rolling, you're right. There is no going back. You're much more impactful in all areas.
Yes. Who you are in one area of your life is who you are in all areas of your life. My previous coach says to me all the time.
Love that. Yeah, I love that.
Um, okay. So how do you, when you talk about family familiar dynamic and the subconscious and all the work that we do,
Mhm.
your previous life of doing this work with leadership and who you hire and who you train and everybody under you and how you show up for them. Let's talk about how that looks now or then versus now, if you want to give like a scenario of how you would have showed up differently to your previous staff if you've had this work prior.
Yeah. So I think the primary difference is like the disposition that we bring to every interaction. It's like a general sturdiness and like steadiness and predictability. I think previously I would have days when I was running around like my hair was on fire and I couldn't even tell you what I did during the day. I had 30 direct reports. I couldn't tell you a single conversation I had with any of them. It showed up as an aloofness, as a general lack of preparedness. It was a lot of me having to rely on my cognitive ability to sort of BS my way through conversations instead of just genuinely being able to be open and vulnerable and transparent and have like a level 3 conversation, as we'd say, like in the KW world, and really connect with someone, which is what I'm able to do now. It's like an openness, a genuine neutral curiosity, seeking to understand, not feeling like I have the 100 plates spinning. I have one or two, and I'm able to be very focused and intentional about the conversation, the content of the conversation, and really detach from the outcome. Just focus on the process of listening to someone that's in front of me, seeking to understand their problem, and trying my best to help them self-discover on this journey of like, how do we solve it going forward? That all started with that change. 100% show up differently now than how I did 4, 5, 6 months ago.
Because when you are aware of your thoughts that are, which is your subconscious, right? When you become aware, you then can choose to have different thoughts, right? I mean, the whole thing is like basically to reprogram your subconscious
Yeah.
in a more positive way and how you want to show up for the rest of your life. And when you change your thoughts, you can then change your energy. And when you change your energy, you receive back differently. So when you change your energy to the more calm version, more calm shows back up to you, right? There's that feedback loop that we talk about in energy form. So you can almost trust now that the deal will come through because you've already changed your energy and you just know that you're attracting that type of positive energy back, as opposed to before you had no idea what was going to happen because you had no idea what you were doing. I mean, you knew
So
what you were
true.
doing, but it was chaotic. And so what will show back up?
Yeah.
Chaos.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's yes. That's one thing that I probably didn't touch on is the way that folks that I'm leading, the way they showed up started to change. Whether it's personal relationships, my wife and I, my kids and I started noticing this change in the people around me, the way that they were acting towards me, almost like in an uncanny nature. Like some folks that were very different previously, started showing up in a more effective, calm, neutral way. And the only thing that I can think of is it's the energy that I'm projecting, whether it's teaching them through my behaviors and the work that I'm putting in, or even just that disposition, that energy I'm bringing to the conversation allows them to maybe not be so high strung to match me. Because as humans, we tend to mirror who we're communicating with. So 100%, that's exactly what started happening. Um, and I think the other thing, we talk a lot about detaching from the outcome.
Yeah.
I've been talking about process over results for quite a long time, and it wasn't until recently where I was able to get really hyper granular with that methodology of like focusing on the process, not the results, detaching from the outcome, to the point where it's like in every conversation now, I'm detaching from the outcome and just trying to focus on listening and responding the best way that I can and being okay, right? If it doesn't go well, that's all right. That's in the realm of possibility. Whereas previously, I would overthink and overanalyze and premeditate everything to the point of my own detriment, where I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be able to focus on what the other person was saying because I was trying to steer the conversation towards an amicable outcome. When in reality, sometimes the best outcome isn't an amicable one. It just isn't. Sometimes that's okay. And we need to be willing to live with it. If we try and manhandle or coerce the conversation or the scenario or the situation to the way that we think we want it to resolve, a lot of times we miss all these other possibilities that are probably better in most circumstances.
Yeah, and you can't force anything, right? Because that's chasing energy. And when you chase, whatever you're looking to get is actually repelling away. It's actually
Yeah.
moving away. We refer to it as the dating analogy. So if you relate this back to sales, right, which every entrepreneur in business thrives off of sales, when you go into an appointment and you're so attached to getting the contract signed, what's likely going to happen? You're not going to get the contract signed because you've missed everything that's actually happened in the appointment because you're
Yeah.
only worried about getting the contract signed. As
Right.
opposed to, right, chase and repel. As opposed to if you go in and you genuinely just want to have the best conversation with the seller,
Yeah.
who cares about the outcome? You're 99% going to get the outcome that you want over and over and over again because you're not chasing. You're actually ending up attract what you
100%.
want.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens all the time. Sales is like just this ecosystem of
Energy.
that exact thing. Yeah, it's energy, right? It's like how we show up. I've spoken about in other videos many times around how in my previous life we preached, like our metric was how many high quality conversations did we have today? It wasn't, what was
As
our
opposed to
as a
how many contracts can you
how
sign?
many contracts, how many appointments, how many closings. Yes. While it's important to understand and we need to PDCA and change and audit the process to yield the end results that we want, it all starts with the work up front. If we go into one of those situations chasing an appointment, chasing a contract, chasing a closing and an end deal, you're going to push it away because you're going in with the wrong intentions. Your focus is in the
Mhm.
wrong place. You're not going to be picking up on the little nuances and the pain and the distress and the motivation, so on and so forth, right? Whereas that's where the gold is, like understanding, being genuinely, openly, neutrally uh, curious. That's
Yeah.
where the gold is, and understanding, seeking to understand, because the solution that you may have in your brain as the ideal one for you almost always is not the ideal one for the client. Very rarely is it I walk into a house, I say, I'm going to buy your house for this amount, or I'm going to sell you this car for this amount, or I'm going to upgrade your phone plan to this one. And they're like, shit, yeah, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Quite often it's a mutual give and a take. It's an understanding. It's doing the dance. And you need to listen, right? It's the whole 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that ratio analogy. If we go in speaking our truth and chasing that outcome, we don't give them the platform to feel like they've been heard. And that's really the most important thing. Sales is just that ecosystem that shows up all the time, but it's the same in marriage. My wife and I go through it all the time. I think that I know what's right all the time. It's my gift and my curse, right? But I don't give her an opportunity to feel heard. Going through this work and finding that, like as you said, how you show up in one area of your life is how you show up in all areas. I started doing this work inside of that domain, right? Like the professional domain. It spilled over into my life. I started having a different lens with communication with the kids and family members and my wife, and now those relationships have increased a lot as well, which has been great.
Yeah. I think we talked about this yesterday on our call. I think that's your biggest win out of all of it. Like, who cares about the job? The job will come and go, like, whatever. Your relationship and your family at home is like the most important thing. So
Totally.
I'm glad that that is where it is now. Congratulations on that, as we say.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Um, yeah, so what you're really talking about in the home appointment with the sales is being authentic, right? Like if you're showing up, authentic is authentic, and then love is the highest form of frequency, energy, right? So if you're showing up in your highest authentic self, which is listening and caring, right? As
Hmm.
human beings do or should do or be,
Yeah.
and then you show up with love and the compassion to actually serve them where they need to be served best and not for your own selfish need, then you'll get the sale every time. And even if you go in, some people, may be thinking, well, I don't do this and I force the sale, like super, super hard and forceful. And I force the sale and I get 90% closing ratio. how hard are your deals though?
How much fall off is there? How
Yeah.
hairy are they? How many referrals are you getting? There's so much meat left on the bone when you
Yeah.
manhandle those sales. Yeah.
Yes. So, yes, another way could work, but that's the harder way, right? And that's the way that we both were doing
Yeah.
things in all
100%.
areas. And then it's like, wait a minute, I could just show up differently, like myself differently, happy, more authentic, and like I'll just get that back. That's amazing.
Wild. Wild. Yep.
Wild. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I think that's where the feedback loop comes in. Once you start to see it, it's like, oh, well, this is the only way I want to do things now. Like, why would I
Right.
ever go back? Yeah.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And for me, like just to bring this full circle, right? We talked about what does it look like now. And I had mentioned about having the ability now to feel proud of myself and have self-worth and being able to validate on my own. It's happened a few times, but the watershed moment for me that started this feedback loop of seeing it happen in real time, overcoming a crazy obstacle with the help of others. Previous Kyle would have given them all the credit. Thank God they were there to help me through this, right? And the situation was I gave a big presentation at one of the biggest real estate masterminds in the country on the main stage about sales and leadership and process and systems, all things that were very much in my wheelhouse, but in a format that terrified me. Public speaking in front of hundreds in person and thousands online. And the presentation that I created was vetoed by the CEO that I worked for at the time, and I had to rebuild it 3 hours before the presentation. Nightmare scenario for old Kyle. Nightmare, like literally would have just left, would have flown home, called my wife, hey, I need a new job tomorrow, I'd quit. This Kyle was like, I embraced it. I understood that I had the tools in my toolbox to do it. I took the input, like the advice. I rebuilt the presentation. I stomped my ass up there on the stage, killed it, had one of the best presentations on the first day, got great feedback. And I felt proud to the point where I cried my eyes out that night about, like, I can't believe I did that. Like, I can't believe that I was able to do it and overcome that minor setback. And I went up there and spoke my stuff in front of a large group of people. And it was me. Like, I felt proud of myself. It wasn't like, man, thank God for such and such, and thank God for so and so, and the input and the advice, and them helping me redo the presentation. I did that shit. I
Yeah.
redid the presentation. I put on the fancy suit and walked myself up there in that foreign environment, and I gave the presentation, including all the conversations afterwards and the shaking of the hands and the ongoing networking that happened that would have felt so alien to me previously, because I had a genuine sense of self-worth that entire weekend. It was insane the way that I showed up. And then even coming home and doing, standard Kyle like reflection, thinking back, it was incredible the amount of pride I felt for how I showed up and the person that I was able to project for an entire week, in very stressful environments. And as we said in the beginning of the pod here, the stressful environments are typically where that old person, where that old persona, right? Those old patterns come out. None of that happened. I was able to be the new me. And this was very early on in my coaching. That made me become obsessed with it. Like when I came home, I'm like, why did that happen?
Yeah.
Why did I not freak out? Who am I? That's when I started to understand, oh, it's because of the work that I've been putting in, right? And this confidence that I'm building. So that's what started this snowball, right? And now here we are 4 or 5 months later.
Mm.
The most recent example is I quit my 6-figure job at one of the best real estate investment companies in the Northeast United States to go start my own consulting and coaching company because it's what brings me joy. It's what I love. I had the confidence to do it. I didn't need anyone to tell me it was the right thing. I knew it was the right thing. And it's working out great. So again, just
How
like a
did you
minor
know it was the
example.
right? Yeah. How did you know it was the right thing?
So for me, I started doing an audit. I did an exercise maybe 3 months ago where I journaled on what does my ideal life look like agnostic of anything that's going on right now or money or relationships. Like in a perfect world,
Yeah.
what does life feel like? What's it smell like? What's it look like? And I started using that as my lens through which I viewed every situation that I came into contact with throughout my day. And through that audit process, I realized, man, 90%, and I would truly estimate it about 90% of the job that I was doing was not in alignment with that life or that person that I want to be. So I made a change. I took the 10% that I absolutely adored from my previous job, which is leadership and coaching, problem solving, helping people self discover and work through these things with my guidance. I love that. It's what I've always loved. And I wouldn't have been able to ever identify that without going through that exercise and that process. And here we are, create an entire company built around not even my 20%, my 10%. The 10% of things that is where I can have the maximum impact in this world. That's what I've pursued. And it's attracting that energy back to me tenfold.
1,000%. Like, I've been witnessing what's been the opportunities coming your way in the very short amount of time that you've made this switch, and it's incredible. And it's
Thank you.
so funny. We talked, I don't know, yesterday or the day before about the doing less, right? Like, one day I'll tell a story, but like a really long time ago, I worked for somebody privately, and there was like 3 of us that were employed, and I would always be the one doing less. And so we had like a do less chair, and it was like a reclining chair, and I would always be in it, but somehow like all the things got done. And
Yeah.
so my employer would be like, he literally would refer to me as do less.
Do less.
And so that's been with me for literally like 10 years or more. And so anyway, the other day you were saying how it's so funny you've literally have done so much less, right? The doing so much less, and your results are showing up like tenfold, like you just said. And that is the reflection of your new energy. So your energy again is like the changing of your thoughts about yourself internally, and that coming back in its in its reality, right? Like,
Yeah.
you manifest in your reality everything that you think you're worth internally, your physical reality.
Yeah. That's where it all starts. Like it all starts in here and in here, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I have pajama pants on right now. Like if I pointed the camera down, like these are the things. Like I read a book with my golden doodle on the couch for 7 hours a day, and I'm getting more done than I ever have. I
Yeah.
would work 9-10 hours a day previously, hair on fire, spinning 100 plates, all the metaphors.
Yeah.
Come home and feel like I ran a marathon every day and would feel incredibly unfulfilled and
Yeah.
unhappy and empty. Now I read 6 chapters a day. I go to the gym. I walk my dog. I work about 3 to 4 hours on the computer on work that I'm incredibly passionate about. I help others. I lead in a very effective way with minimal effort. With minimal effort, and the beauty of it is my capacity has increased so much. I'm
Mhm.
able to have a similar output with much less energy, which now has freed up all of this other time and energy that I can devote to my family or to my friends or to other passion projects, right? So I think, again, we said earlier the exponential impact. What does that lead to? Well, if I show up differently with my family, opportunities may show up, my relationships will improve, I become closer with those people, they trust me more. Same with the people that I'm leading and doing coaching calls on with. I show up better. They're more inclined to send people to me, so on and so forth. The impact is exponential. It leads to more opportunity, all by doing less. It's incredibly counterintuitive, but take it from me as someone who sold their house and gambled everything on this journey. It works out. And if you continue to be radically uncompromising and you have a very clear definition of the person that you want to be and the life that you want to live, you will attract those things back to you.
Yeah, the universe is supposed to and meant to give you back what you're asking for, what you say you are.
Incredible.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's
I
been
could
great.
talk about this literally all day, as you know. So when do you want to do it again?
Yeah, I think we probably just need to set something up weekly where we hop on
Yeah.
here and chat it out. Um,
I
Yeah,
agree.
I got all the time in the world.
And this is like the most effortless thing ever.
It so is, man, and it's funny, like all the content. So you talk about the opportunities and stuff that are coming my way. It's just like the tip of the iceberg, really. But it all came from the content that I was able to put out from these conversations. You and I are just talking about shit that we're passionate about. We
The
just happen to
most.
have a camera setup that took us 18 minutes to figure out before we got the
Way
cost turned.
too long.
Way too long. We just happen to have cameras set up. We're talking about things that we're passionate about, right? So
Yeah.
that's like when we say effortless, that's what we're talking about, right? I'm able to take this conversation, chop it up, put it out there to the world, free content, because I want to make an impact. And from that, opportunities are coming back. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I think if other people start doing the same work, they'll learn to love it as well. Hence, starting that positive feedback loop we mentioned before.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm so glad you're seeing the result already.
Thanks, Kate.
Chat you later, Kyle.
Later, Gator.